Welcome back to Western Civ. We're picking up with World War II. We just had France knocked out and the British escaping from Dunkirk. So let's pick up here with part 2 of World War II. From 1940, what's Hitler doing? Taking it all the way to the end with the destruction of Germany and Hitler's suicide. So let's pick up here with the British have escaped from Dunkirk. Well, what about an invasion of Britain? And of course, if you were British, you'd be fearing this blitzkrieg coming to England, and England doesn't have many defenses there. Well, the answer is that Hitler never really intended to invade England. He really had no landing craft. He has no navy to speak of. And so Hermann Goering will take over here and decide and tell Hitler that he can bring England to its knees simply through air power. The Luftwaffe will bomb England into submission. 2,700 planes will bomb England into submission. He starts in August of 1940 with bombing raids over England, over airfields and factories, and then into the cities, bombing England into submission, he claims. Well, this is called the Blitz, English, the Blitz, and many nations would think they would surrender, but the British do not. They have Prime Minister Churchill. Churchill will be on the radio every day, giving speeches, inspiring the British, stiff upper lip. You know, England will survive. The few, the proud, the RAF fighting the German Air Force, the people clearing the streets every morning, going in the shelters every night. They'll send their kids off to the countryside to be taken care of as the people stay in London. Churchill himself will stay in London there, fighting to the bitter end. He will fight them on the beaches. He will fight them in the air. They'll never surrender, says Churchill. Well, while the Battle of Britain's going on, while Goering is trying to bomb England into submission, Hitler is going to invade the Soviet Union. Not a good idea. If we're trying to chalk up Hitler's mistakes here, this would be about his second. The first mistake being letting the British escape from Dunkirk. And then this is the second mistake of opening a second front. While you're trying to bomb England into submission, turning your entire army to the east. And he had a peace treaty with Stalin. Stalin, expected this treaty to last and was not expecting this. Well, why does Hitler do this? Why does he go after the Soviet Union like that? Well, the answer is we believe that his number one concern is communism. You know, most people think it's the Jews, that he's all about killing the Jews, which he definitely is. But his overriding concern seems to be ridding the world of communism. And he thinks the world will thank him for this. So his second reason is that he expects England to surrender at any minute. You know, no one can take that kind of bombing day after day. And then the third reason is this Lebensraum. He promised this in the Mein Kampf, that the Germans need more area, and Eastern Europe is the place. And then finally, the lesson of World War I, Germans had run out of food and run out of equipment in World War I. If you invade Russia, you'll have plenty of food, and there's plenty of oil down in southern Russia. So this is why he does it. He's going to turn his army from facing England to now facing the Soviet Union. And he goes after them. Operation Barbarossa, 1941. It'll be a massive undertaking for Hitler. Everything he's got. 3 armies will be made. The first army, the Northern Army, will go after Leningrad. The Middle Army will go after Moscow. And the Third Army will take the roads south to Kiev. He launches it June 22nd, 1941. After the snows of winter have melted, after that water has dried up, the roads are safe to go on into Russia, and he invades June 22nd. Napoleon invaded about June 23rd, 1812. So about the same time. We'll see how these invasions go. It did not work out well for Napoleon. Operation Barbarossa in the initial months is a huge success. His 3 armies just go crashing through the Russians' forces. Armies moving toward Leningrad, toward Moscow, toward Kiev. Unstoppable. Great German victories as they go smashing through these Russian armies on their way to these 3 cities. And millions of Russian prisoners. Entire Russian armies surrendering. Again, they have no leadership. And there's no word from Stalin. They have no orders, and so they just surrender by the millions. They'll be going to camps. Now, these aren't death camps. The death camps were for the Jews. The Russian camps will just be, they'll die by the millions by neglect. In fact, few of these millions of Russian prisoners will ever make it back to the Soviet Union. They will die by the millions in these nasty German prison camps. Well, the success. The Germans appear to be just unstoppable. By September of 1941, the Northern Army has reached Leningrad. By October, they're 60 miles away from Moscow. They capture Kiev. They just appear unstoppable. And finally, the Russians throw a counterpunch. As the Germans approach Moscow, the Russians are able to put an army together and actually attack the Germans on December 5th, with the Germans 35 miles from Moscow. the Russians actually attack and drive the Germans back. The temperature was minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit. The Russians can actually function in that. The Germans can't function, and they will be knocked back from Moscow. When Hitler finds out about this, he goes crazy that his plans have not been carried out. He goes literally crazy. There are accounts of him just foaming at the mouth and yelling and screaming and falling on the floor, flailing, and he will fire his army commanders. All over the German army, the high commanders will be removed for incompetence, given desk jobs somewhere, and Hitler announces he's going to command everything personally. The only person he can trust is himself to carry this mission out. So he is stymied outside of Moscow, but it still looks like he's, winning. And it's about that time, that December 7th, 1941, that news comes that the Japanese have attacked America at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. They have knocked out most of our Pacific Navy. All the battleships are sunk. And Hitler declares war on us. It's really quite strange. He didn't have to do this. But of all of Hitler's sick qualities, if you're looking for a nice side, he actually is very loyal. He's very loyal to Mussolini as the Italians fumble through World War II. And he's also very loyal to the Japanese, his Asian counterparts, his Asian Aryans, he'll call them. And when they hit us at Pearl Harbor, he too will declare war on the United States, figuring he's got nothing to lose. The American Navy's been crippled. We'll focus on war against Japan. He's got nothing to fear from us. Well, it doesn't work out that way. Our president, FDR, has already been meeting with Churchill, and now he can meet officially with Churchill, and they agree that everything must be done to save Great Britain. Of course, Churchill's extremely happy about that. He's still being bombed every day by the Germans. And they will agree to attack Germany first, that the Japanese war will be put on the back burner. Of course, he doesn't tell the Americans this because the Americans are fuming at Japan, but he will devote most of our effort to the war against Germany. And the plans will be, at some point, to liberate France. Well, Stalin in this, what's his view? Well, he joins an alliance with us, the British, and the Soviets will form allies. Of course, Churchill and the Soviets is never very friendly, but FDR kind of plays the middleman. He will try to smooth over things between Churchill and Stalin. So these are the allies. And of course, what does Stalin want? Well, Stalin wants help. In 1942, the entire German armies are still in Russia, attacking toward Leningrad, attacking toward Moscow. He needs help. And so he wants the British and Americans to attack where the Germans aren't. You could land in Germany. There's no one there. Stalin wants a second front. But we're not quite ready for this. And of course, he will view this as a betrayal that he needs help and we don't give it to him. Well, what's Hitler up to? Hitler in 1942, again, he's in charge of the German army. He will focus everything. He will pull troops from Leningrad and pull troops away from Moscow and focus everything into southern Russia. Everything he's got into southern Russia. And again, looking for those natural resources, food and oil. And it's a huge success. 1942 is a huge successful year for him. As he pulls back from Leningrad, pulls back from Moscow, he'll devote everything into southern Russia, down toward the Black Sea. He'll capture the Crimea, and then he'll run into a city over here called Stalingrad, which wasn't really part of the plan, but it's got the name Stalingrad. And he will devote himself to capturing that city. He must capture Stalingrad. Well, 1942 will have the three turning points. This war will be over toward the end of 1942. As far as the Germans winning, they will not be allowed to win. Three great turning points occur in the month of November 1942. Number one, the Germans become trapped at Stalingrad. Winter's coming on, and Hitler tells them they cannot retreat. An entire German army will be trapped trying to hold on in Stalingrad. And then Rommel, down in Africa, Hitler had sent some of his tanks down to Africa to capture Egypt, and they will fail. Rommel is defeated at El Alamein in Egypt, November 42, so he is done in Africa. The British are safe in Egypt, in the Suez Canal. And the final turning point in November 1942, Americans' troops go into action. We had been bombed on December 7th, and it takes us almost a year, 11 months, before American troops can do anything, and we land in Morocco and Algeria, where it's relatively safe. There are no Germans there. We do get shot at by the French. The French will actually shoot at us a little bit before we capture their countries there. So not real happy about that. But we're in the game. American troops are in the war against the Germans. Well, as we roll into 1943, Stalingrad surrenders. The German army at Stalingrad surrendered in February 1943. An entire German army surrenders. And 1943 will be spent rolling the Germans back toward Germany. On this map here, this will indicate the 1943 time. From Stalingrad right there, the Russians rolling the Germans back toward Kiev in 1943, away from Moscow in 1943. So the Germans are being rolled back toward Germany. This war, for all practical purposes, it's just a matter of time before Hitler's rolled all the way back to Germany. What are we doing in 1943? Well, we're tied with the British, and Churchill's plan is to work into southern Europe. So from Africa, we will jump up to Sicily. From Africa, jumping to the island of Sicily, which we capture, and then on to Italy. Land here at the toe, and then moving slowly, slowly, slowly up the shin of Italy toward the knee, which we will not get to in 1943. We will not get to Rome in 1943. Very slow, painful drive up the Italian boot. And of course, Stalin's going crazy. Men are dying by the millions. He's killing millions of Germans, fighting thousands of German tanks. And we're busy capturing Sicily and the leg of Italy. We're harassing the Germans there. Mussolini has resigned. He has been taken out of office. And Italy is just being controlled by the Germans. We're tying a few Germans down in Italy. As we roll into 1944, here's what's happening in Russia. By 1944, the Russians are moving even closer to Germany, pushing the Germans back toward Poland. And this is when we decide to get into action. Americans finally now, and British finally landing into Europe. In 1944, we're going to set foot into northern Europe to liberate France. We land in Normandy. This is peninsula right here, sticking off of France. There's another peninsula here called Brittany, and then there's this peninsula here called Normandy, the Normandy Peninsula, the old Viking area where the Normans used to live. They came from 1066 and invaded England from there. So we have to cross the channel. This is 1066 in reverse, the British landing into Normandy. We will hit 5 beaches, us and the British and the Canadians. The Americans will hit Utah Beach in Normandy, Omaha Beach. These are the code names of the beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. And we hit them on June 6th, 1944. The Americans go into action, the British go into action, the Canadians go into action. A very daring landing using these landing craft where the front will flop down on the beach and the American troops and British troops and Canadian troops can come out. And it goes like this. June 6th was a pretty daring event, but by June 7th, we're securely on the beaches. You might be thinking of Omaha Beach when you think of the destruction. It's only on Omaha Beach that the Americans get chewed up. The other beaches all went pretty smoothly. The British and Canadians and the other Americans at Utah Beach, by day 1, are clearly on the beaches. Omaha Beach was much more of a struggle, very deadly. 5,000 Americans gave their lives there. So it's a very traumatic event for Americans, but it's not the entire Normandy landing. There weren't a whole lot of Germans there to defend the beaches. Still, despite the fact that we're able to get on the beach, it'll be 2 months before we're able to push inland. That's how hard it is to put an army from England into France. We finally break out in August or toward the end of July, Operation Cobra. We bring in our best commander, Patton, with his 3rd Army, and he will break out from the beaches of Normandy. By August 1st, he is 35 miles outside of Normandy. He's into the clear, into French countryside. And Eisenhower, our commander, tells Patton, go for it. All out defensive, whatever you need, throw caution to the wind, just drive past the Germans. This is our blitzkrieg. Finally, America has reached the point where we can do a blitzkrieg. We own the skies, our tanks are rolling by the hundreds, and our troops by the thousands. Patton's 3rd Army rolling through France, on its way to Paris to liberate the French. And he can't do it. He's told not to do this. He's told to give it to the French. We have French traveling with us, the Free French, the French who did not surrender. They'll be allowed to liberate Paris under the leadership of Charles de Gaulle, who will eventually be president of France. So Paris is liberated by the Free French under Charles de Gaulle. Patton has to watch that moment of glory. But here's the map. From the Normandy beaches here, we finally break out to the south and then sweep over here to Paris. And the Germans are on the run. Once we break out of Normandy, the Germans, we're getting behind them now, and it's over. We're going to liberate France. The Germans are rolling back toward Germany. This war is over. The Russians are approaching from the east. We're approaching from the west. this war is all but over at this point. The British will move up the coast from France into Belgium and into Holland. Americans moving from Paris to the Rhine River toward Alsace and Lorraine, the same places, pretty much the same battlefields we fought in World War I. And here's what's happening with the Russians. By August of 44, the Russians are turning to the south. The Russians actually move south into southern Europe here. They're capturing all these countries here. And of course, we're alarmed by this. Why aren't they just marching onto Berlin? Well, they're capturing parts of southern Europe here. They're going to take over Europe, it appears to us. So it becomes imperative for Americans and British to get on the move. Wrap this war up before the Russians can capture all of Europe. Montgomery has a plan. Montgomery is the British commander. He'd beaten Rommel at El Alamein. Montgomery has a plan to win the war by Christmas of 44. It's called Operation Market Garden. He's going to drop British and American troops behind the Germans. As the Germans are retreating back to the Rhine, we need to drop in there and capture at least one bridge. And that's the idea, to airdrop into Holland, capturing a string of bridges, and then finally one bridge over the Rhine. And it works. Half of it works. The American paratroops will capture their bridges, and then the British will get destroyed. At Arnhem Bridge in Holland, they can't capture it. They drop into a German SS Panzer division there, and these paratroopers will get chewed up by these Nazi SS troops. Terrible for the British paratroopers. If you want to see a movie about it, great movie, A Bridge Too Far, starring pretty much everybody who was anybody in Hollywood in the 1970s, including Sean Connery. Great movie about the British and American airdrop into Holland. So we're pretty much stuck now. We did not capture the bridge over the Rhine as we wanted to, and we're stuck now at the end of 1944. It's snowing here. The Germans are behind their west wall. They have defenses in Germany. We're pretty much stuck. The British are stuck in Holland. We're stuck in Belgium and Alsace and Lorraine. So we can pretty much settle down for the winter now. The winter of 1944. The Germans appear to be out of action, snowing, no one can fly, no one can do anything much. And Hitler counterattacks us. This is the famous Battle of the Bulge, as Hitler counterattacks, throws everything he's got at us, everything in the western side against us, through the Ardennes forest. Again, just like 1940, his tanks come rolling through the Ardennes. These are much bigger tanks than 1940. Those are 1944 Tiger tanks and Panther tanks, thousands of them. And then 250,000 troops coming at us. He hits us on December 16th. Our guys were already hunkered down, ready for Christmas break. And he is going to hit us between the armies where the British and American troops had joined there, splitting between us, and it just is a huge success for him. His one drawback is fuel. His Tiger tanks and big giant tanks use a lot of fuel, and he doesn't have much. They have pretty much one tank of gas, and they are told that they need to capture American fuel. We have fuel to spare just laying around, so capture American fuel. This is called the Battle of the Bulge, where he hits us here. He'll bulge into our lines. These were all American troops, stationed along this line here, and he'll come bulging into us, just crushing through us. This semi-blitzkrieg. It's not a complete blitzkrieg because he doesn't have any airplanes left, but just tanks and infantry. And his huge tanks, these giant tanks, they're much bigger than our tanks, these massive German tanks, just come rolling through us. We managed to hold up at a few road crossings. There's a few road crossings in Belgium where our paratroops, 82nd Airborne and 101st Airborne, hold up and are able to hold some crossroads, which makes these giant tanks have to go off-road, and that uses up their fuel. It really slows them down. And then finally, about December 23rd, the sky clears. Patton comes up from the south with his tanks to rescue our guys that were holed up in those towns. The air clears, we control the sky, Patton's tanks are rolling, and Patton comes to the rescue. And the Battle of the Bulge, what started off as a great German victory, a last blitzkrieg, becomes a great German disaster. The Germans will lose over 600 of those great tanks and 100,000 of those soldiers, so it is a disaster for Hitler. But it did stop us. It pretty much, really made us recoil, put a crimp on our lines at the end of 1944 into 1945. We're going to be hurt, but it's still a German disaster. It's an American victory, the Battle of the Bulge. As we go into 1945, the final result will come on the Eastern Front. On the Western Front, we'll be trying to cross the Rhine in 1945. The Russians, however, capture Warsaw in January, and then they capture Budapest and Vienna. The question is, what are they doing down there? Well, they want to hold those countries. They're not going to give them back. You'll also have a lot of revenge, lots of stories of revenge as these Soviet troops enter these German allied countries, all kinds of raping and pillaging. And again, this is just horrifying to us, but to the Russians, this is payback, what the Germans had done to them. If you want to see a really good movie about German atrocities against the Russians, a movie called Come and See. Come and See. It is it's a Russian-made movie about the Germans occupying a Russian village and just terrorizing the population. So that was payback for what the Germans had done to the Russians. By February of 45, the Russians finally decide to knock out, as we are finally crossing the Rhine, the Russians finally decide to enter Berlin. Hitler goes into his bunker. That's a concrete bunker complex underground that he had in Berlin. He and Eva Braun and all of his top advisors and top Nazis will be in the bunker with him. As the Russians enter Berlin on April 16th, the famous Battle of Berlin, as the Russians move neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood toward the bunker. And then finally, April 30th, Hitler commits suicide, along with Eva Braun and all these top Nazis committing suicide, and the Russians capture Berlin, and it's over. Well, the end of World War II is different than the end of World War I. World War I, we had never occupied Germany to speak of. After World War II, we're going to occupy Germany and hold them down for a while. The eastern side of Germany will be held by the Russians. The British will hold northern. The Americans will hold this chunk of southern Germany, and the French will hold little pieces. And then the animosity sets in, the hatred between the Russians and the Allies, the Western democracies, will begin to harden, and the Russians will cordon off their zone, and we'll unite our zones together. The British, French, and Americans will put ours together into what eventually will be East Germany and West Germany as the Cold War sets in, and we will have to station troops in West Germany, and they will station troops in West Germany and bring pretty much all of Eastern Europe, Poland, Czechoslovakia, under communist control. That's the Cold War.